Once you have your bookmark, let's open our Bibles to Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2. I want to read just a very short portion of this book. And today, we're definitely going to talk about fathers, but I want to bring in a word that is used 7 times throughout the Bible. It's the word peculiar. Down in verse 11 of Titus chapter 2, it says, "For the grace of God that brings salvation hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age, looking for the blessed hope and glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from every lawless deed, and purify himself for his own special people, zealous for good works." I want to tell you something that you may not have seen, or it may have just passed right by you, but back on January 10th, there was a new holiday that some had wanted many more people to celebrate than just was. It was called Peculiar People Day. Nobody knows who came up with the idea of making a special day. Somebody thinks it might have been a greeting card company, but the whole idea was for people to celebrate those who are eccentric or nonconformists or otherwise unique in some way. There's actually a website devoted to Peculiar People Day of January 10th where it says you might do things such as shop for groceries while listening to dance music through your earphones and dance the day away. Spend time at a hair salon and have your hair dyed blue, pink, or yellow. If you have a pet, dress it up with a wig and go for a walk at a nearby park. Cook some type of strange food and serve it to your family, or visit a mall. Take pictures of people doing unusual things. So I think we can understand when we hear about a Peculiar People Day, but all in all, the idea of peculiar people would give you the idea that they were odd or weird in some sort of way or fashion. In essence, it would say that these folks are not normal. And when you think about peculiarity of people, you would naturally believe that there is something different about them. But that's not what the original word meant. If you go back to the original word, it comes from the Latin peculium, which means private property. So in the 1600s, when the King James Version of the Bible was being translated from the Latin and it was brought in, they used this word peculiar, and it was to mean private property. Now I know that may throw a wrench in what you might think of that word. This was a treasured possession that belonged to God. So when we hear in the Scriptures of there being a peculiar people or God needing a peculiar type people, He's not looking for someone that is weird or odd. He is looking for someone that will allow Him to possess Him and to be that peculiar person. It's important for us to understand what words mean in the Bible. In Deuteronomy chapter 14 and verse 2, God told Israel, "Thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto Himself, and to all the nations that are upon the earth." In other words, what God was telling the nation of Israel is that I own you. You are my private property. You are my people. And because of that, I will treat you differently than I treat any other else. No one touched them unless God wanted them touched. They were under His exclusive protection. Now what's intriguing, I think, about that is God says the exact same thing about you. Over in 1 Peter chapter 2 in verse 9, God declares you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of Him who have called you out of darkness unto His marvelous light. So we are peculiar, not different, not odd, but we are private property of God. We are a special people to God. When we give our lives to God through His Son, Jesus Christ, when we decide to take on the name of Christian, when we want the sins removed out of our life through the purpose of baptism, finding that remission of sins, we become private property of God. Now, I want you to notice, this is what God did for us. We didn't deserve it. There's nothing that we've done in this world today to be able to deserve it. God declared it. We're honored to be peculiar. We're honored to be His property. We're honored to know that there was no good deeds that were done. There was nothing that we were able to pay in any type of sum to be able to do this. So I want us to begin today by thinking about that today being Father's Day, you would think that, well, Kevin, I thought we would have a Father's Day sermon. Well, we are. But I wanted to begin by talking about being peculiar. See, the problem with today's society and culture is that throughout the majority of our lives, when we talk about family, we use it in the biblical sense, where the Bible speaks and tells us that at one time there's going to be a moment in which a person is going to leave his father and his mother, and he's going to cleave to his wife, or she to her husband. They're going to become one flesh. And in that one flesh, they're going to do what God has asked them to do, and that would be to procreate and to be able to continue the livelihood of people on this earth. Basic definition of what we would consider as marriage. But things have been misconstrued in our lives today. It's not so much cut and dry when you talk about families, when you talk about the issue of having a family. And today being Father's Day, naturally you would say, well, of all the families, if you have a family in this world, there must be a father. But we know that that's not true, because people are redefining what it means to be family. In Ezekiel chapter 22, down in verse 30, I want you to listen to what it says here. It says, "And I, being God, sought for a man among them that should make up a hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none." There are prerequisites for being a good father. Being a man, functioning as a man, taking the responsibility as a man, thinking like a man, acting as a man, working like a man. All of these are prerequisites for being a father. It's more than being there when you have a birth of a child. It's more than signing your name on the birth certificate. There is more to it of being a father than just thinking that I want to call myself a father and not hold up to the fatherly duties that are there. And I think we have to understand, you will not be a good father unless you're a good man. You cannot be any less than a man and still consider yourself to be a good father. It's a dying art today. There are not many in our nation anymore. Thank God we can look around and we can find some few good men around us where we can use and set examples for us of what it means to be a father to our families today. I was reading the men's thesaurus. I apologize for that. Men don't always say what they mean. And ladies, if you'll just please allow me just for a short time to help educate you just a little bit. When a man says it would take me too long to explain, he means I have no idea really how it works. If a man says, take a break, honey, you're working too hard, it means I can't hear the game over the vacuum cleaner. When you hear the word, that's interesting, dear, it means, are you still talking? Can I help with dinner? Usually means, why isn't dinner ready yet? You know how bad my memory is. Usually remembers, I can remember the theme song to Hogan's Heroes. I can remember the number on my driver's license. I can probably remember every VIN number on every automobile and every thing that I have that has one, but I can't remember your birthday. When I say I can't find it, it usually means it didn't fall into my outstretched hand, so I'm completely clueless. If I tell you you look terrific, it means please don't go change all over again. Let's just go with what you got. If I tell you I'm not lost, I know exactly where we are. It's that no one is ever going to see us alive again. When a man says, I don't remember saying that, it's because he means anything I may have said 6 months ago is inadmissible in an argument. In fact, all past comments become null and void after 7 days. I want to take you back to 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, where it uses the word a holy nation, a peculiar people. Have you ever thought about what holy means? Now I want you to think about how our history has used the word holy. You have to use holy in a different sense sometimes, even in a different way, maybe that's even thought. I grew up always knowing that there was a gospel meeting. We were going to a gospel meeting, and that was it. If anybody ever called it a revival, you know as well as I do, we weren't attending that. That was some type of liberal jargon out there that we didn't need to even hear anything about. We wouldn't go to a congregation that was holding a revival. That was just wrong. Why? Because history has always told us that we only hold gospel meetings. But yet I can open up the songbook and I can ask God to revive me again and sing it with no problem at all. We allow these thought processes or how we're brought up or the things that have been taught to us so many times throughout our lives that sometimes we really forget or we don't take into an understanding of how we can have new and maybe even a greater related concept of a certain word. First, it's not a deep theological term. You don't have to have a college degree to try to understand it. It's a very basic word, and it means separate or set apart. If something becomes holy, then it becomes set apart. So if we say that today is our holy time of worship, it is a time that is set apart for us to be able to worship God in spirit and in truth. So when we hear people say, I don't need church services. I don't need to go sit with those of that number. I have a personal relationship with God. I can talk to Him. I can pray to Him. And I don't need the church. And last week I said, you need the church more than God needs you. You need to be inside the church. You need to be a part of the church. You need to be an active member of the church. Why? Because God commands it. And not only God commanded, He demands it for us. And then He tells us to be a holy people, a holy nation, set apart from all those others in the world that today. When we're holy, when we're set apart from the rest of the world, then we become a treasured possession by God. Think about a possession that is treasured that you have. Something that you have either stored away in a lockbox, put away in a closet somewhere, in a safe, somewhere, something that it may not mean anything to anybody else, but it means something to you. You usually find this when families have yard sales. And when families have yard sales, we put things out there that we believe need to be sold. And then usually I'll walk through it and I'll look down and I'll go, honey, why would you put that out there? Well, you don't use it. You haven't used it alone. Yeah, but I want to keep that. I want to take that and keep it away. Colton is worse than anybody. We put his toys out there that he's not seen in years. And Colton will go out there and just start gathering up toys. Just gathering up. Mom, I'm not selling that. But you don't use it. And next thing you know it, they're back in the garage. But they're treasured possessions. And I want you to think about what God thinks of you. Ever since the inception of your father and your mother, giving you life, growing in your mother's belly, God knew who you were. God knew all that you were. God knew all that your potential was going to be. God knew everything about your life, all choices that you were going to have throughout your life. You are a treasured possession for God. But sometimes we don't treat ourselves as treasured possessions, do we? We do things that are wrong sometimes, and we sin before God. God's not happy with that, but He still wants you to be treasured. Sometimes we lose our relationship. We cut our relationship from God, and we go away and we allow ourselves to become what would be considered dusted in this life. But God can wipe the dust off just as you can from your treasured possessions, and He can make you just valuable and brilliant all over again. Remember, peculiar, something that is different. It's not normal. In a sense, we are not normal. Being a treasured possession, we're not just normal people out there. God not only loves us, cares for us, but He also relies upon us. We have responsibilities. We have responsibilities as Christians today. We have responsibilities to ourselves. We have responsibilities in the roles that we play. Fathers, you have responsibility of your own household. God expects things from us. God expects us to be able to treat our wives the best that we can. And do we get that right every time? No. Do we get that right all the time? Absolutely not. But God expects things from us. Why? God expects things from you as well. To be able to treat your husbands and your fathers in a way that is important today. To let them know that they are different. To let them know that they are a part of a plan that God has set. Part of a plan that God had set forth all the way back to Adam and Eve. A plan that was set forth for families to be able to learn and to love. But yet in today's life, things become misconstrued. One thing that is important is that God made each and every one of us holy. But the Bible also says we're to make ourselves holy. In 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 15 and 16, is just as He who called you is holy, so be holy in all that you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. So God tells us, each one of us, you and I alike, God tells us to be holy. He calls us to be different than the rest of the world. He calls us not to be normal, but He calls us to be peculiar. Remember? Peculiar. Not odd. Not weird. Private property. Notice what it says in Titus chapter 2 and also in verse 12. God's grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and to worldly passions and to live a self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age. And you might ask yourself, why should we live like that? Because He gave Himself for us so that He could redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto Himself a peculiar people zealous of good works. So when we're set apart and when we decide that we're going to be holy and peculiar, remember those words are starting to maybe even change in your vocabulary a little bit. It is going to cause you to increase yourself so that you can become zealous to do good things in this life today. Showing our families what is right and important. To be able to lift one another up. To be able to teach our children what a father can do in the definition of a father and what a mother can do in a definition of a mother. Have you ever thought about when is a bad time to be different? You know, I sat and thought about this morning. I'm sitting here telling everybody that we need to be different. We need to be something that other people can see. And then I thought, well, what about people in high school? Remember when you were in high school, you didn't want to be different back then. It invited ridicule. People didn't want you to be in their group. People didn't want you to sit with them. People didn't want you to be around them. Many people shy away from being different in life because they learn that lesson all too well. And they would think that, Kevin, if you're teaching me to be different, I'm trying to blend in the best that I can. The better that I blend, the easier my life becomes, especially young in life. But then now you're telling me to be different or to be treasured by God or to be unowned property by God. I think it all depends on how you look at it. If you've ever been to the Arlington National Cemetery, there's so many fallen comrades out there that have been placed into the ground. It's just out of Washington, D.C. It's an honorary burial place of some of America's greatest heroes. Probably the biggest event or one of the greatest highlights, if you've ever visited there, is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And at that Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, there is a guard. It's one of the highest honors in all of the Army. Not everybody gets to hold this position. Only 10% of the applicants pass the rigorous tests that are required, including several hours a day of marching, rifle drill, uniform preparation. Even Tomb Sentinel is expected to completely memorize the history both of the tomb and of the cemetery, such as knowing how to find the graves of all the prominent people that are buried in the cemetery. And there's tests that are done on that. A guard normally serves between 1 and 1.5 years. But the reason I tell you that is that each guard that passes those tests that are placed at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier are given a badge called the Tomb Guard Identification Badge. It's one of the least awarded badges in the Army, and the sentinels at that post are held at such a high standard that if they do anything that is deemed behavior unbecoming a tomb guard, or that brings dishonor upon the tomb, their badges may be revoked, even after they've left active duty in the military service. And to date, even after decades of this established honor, 9 individuals have lost their badges due to their conduct unbecoming. These soldiers are different. They stand in the hottest of days to guard that tomb. They stand in the wettest of storms. Just not too long ago, there was a hurricane that rolled right up the East Coast. The hurricane winds were pushing to the point that they thought that they were going to actually have to call the soldiers out for the first time ever as they were guarding the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and they refused to do that. They stood even as tropical storm winds passed through and passed by them. They wouldn't leave that post. Different? Absolutely. Distinctive? Most definitely. So when God calls us to be something distinctive, we most definitely need to be able to take it with a serious matter. On numerous occasions, I have brought up just the simple fact that I believe people play with Christianity, that they don't take it serious, that they don't put any effort into it, they don't put any time into it. They allow it to flow over them and they allow themselves to be a part of it, but they never take an active approach at being a Christian. We don't care too much about our worship service. We don't care anything about a Bible study. We don't care enough about our own Bible study. We're probably not going to care enough about our children's Bible study. So watch as I don't learn. If I don't learn, I definitely know that my child won't learn because I'm not going to make them be a part of a Bible study. So we don't really think ourselves as being distinctive, do we? We're not privately owned or peculiar. We're not holy or set apart when we act just like everybody else does when it comes to our thought processes of who God is. When He tells us that we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, we've been called out of darkness into His marvelous light. We'll just take it with a grain of salt. It ain't a big deal. I'll just do whatever I want to do and get on out. You're not going to find me. You're not going to allow me. You're not going to watch me become a specialized person when it comes to the art of Christianity because I just don't care. And you may get away with it now. But there's going to become a time, whether it's a time as set here on this earth, when something hits us or moves us or something happens to us to where we can then proclaim our allegiance to God, or we stand before God on the day of judgment because it tells us that on that day, our Wednesday night class will remember this, every knee will bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And so God says, because I've given you this great honor, you need to live the holy lives. You need to live differently than the world around you. Say no to ungodliness and to world passions. Let's look at one more scripture if we can. Over in 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3. I'll wait for you a second so you can turn your Bibles there. I hope you are. Down in verse 2 as it begins there, Paul tells Timothy that there are going to be people who are lovers of themselves. Are we guilty of that? Lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of ungodliness, but denying its power, have nothing to do with them. Have nothing to do with them? Why? Why would it tell us to have nothing to do with them? Very simply because you are called to live differently than that. You're called to live holy lives. In fact, Peter writes that we need to live such good lives among the pagans that because they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that He visits us. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12. Even though they hate you, even though they despise you, even though they reject your God, even though they don't believe Jesus Christ died for you, they respect you for the person that you are. Or they don't because you don't live holy, righteously, and godly. You remember that Jesus said, just about like that, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. And what? Glorify your Father which is in heaven. We live holy lives not because we're nice people, not because we're better than anyone else. No, we live our holy lives because we want to glorify God. We live our holy lives because being peculiar tells us that we are private property of God. We live our holy lives because we're not going to do the things that we feel or care that we want to do. We're going to live our lives holy to God very simply so that God can see the dedication we have towards Him. You know, our righteous deeds aren't done because we're more righteous than other folks outside of the church, but because the God we serve is better than anything this world can offer. And we love Him so much that we want others to be able to love Him too. One last thought. You and I are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. Another word for holy is sacred. As Christians, everywhere you go is sacred. Everything you do is sacred. Every person that you touch is sacred. Not just inside the four walls of a Sunday morning service do you feel sacredness is there. But beyond that and outside of that, you are sacred with every person that you come in contact with because God is living in you. And as long as we remain committed to God, He removes the sin from our lives and He keeps us holy and righteous. And if that's true, then everything that we touch becomes holy and righteous as well. Sometimes I worry that we don't act that way. Sometimes I worry that our families are not being taught that way. It seems so simple, such a short time ago when husband and wife and children made up family, and now it seems like the definition of that, the godly definition of that, is just gone. And how do you do that? How do we allow that in our lives today and still claim to be holy and righteous to God? So I pray for each one of us that more than just identifying who fathers are today, more than identifying what families are today, that you can look at it as a personal lesson and ask yourself, am I private property of God? Do I treat God that way? Knowing what He expects and what He needs from me and what He wants from me today. And when we fail to realize that, know that our relationship is strained. It's strained. Where are our families of old? Where are our families today?